This week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, with agriculture broadcaster Orion Samuelson and yours truly, Max Armstrong, and featuring agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier. This week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone.
Across the country, field work is underway and planters are rolling, but it's also almost tax season. Hello, folks. Thanks for joining us on This Week in Agribusiness. I'm Mike Pearson, and as we look ahead, even though a lot of us are raring to get out into the fields, we also have to make time for a little paperwork. Tax season is almost upon us. To help us prepare for that, Glenn Birnbaum from Sikich LLP is here to join us. Glenn, as we look over this past year, a lot of farmers received more money from the government than we have in the past. Are there any things we need to be aware of with regard to MFP and CFP when it comes to reporting them for our income taxes?
Well, thanks, Mike. I appreciate being on. Yeah, the main thing there is, when you receive the money, it is going to be considered taxable income. Different from like the PPP money, but if you receive the cash in the current year, it is going to be taxable, and you have to report that on your tax return.
Now, you mentioned there the PPP. These were the loan programs that were offered by the government, and I believe most of them are forgivable or have been forgiven. Glenn, does that change the way those monies are reported?
Well, there was a question about whether the PPP money was going to be taxable or not, and finally, after much drama, we got that all settled. And so, you just want to make sure that you don't treat the the receipt of that money as taxable income, and then all the expenses that you paid with the money, those are deductible. So you can just let that part of it go. So in the end, it's just remember to not report that deposit that you received as taxable income. It is non-taxable.
Gotcha. Now, Glenn, you mentioned right there that we have seen lots of delays. It has been time consuming to get these rule proposals out and how farmers and regular everyday Americans should be reporting their taxes in 2021. What all has that changed? I understand the filing deadlines have moved for this year.
Yeah, and normally it's April 15th, and we're about a week away on that, but they've moved it to May 17th, so basically a month out, and that's for you don't have to even file an extension by April 15th. You have until May 17th to pay any tax that you owe, or to decide at that time to file an extension. Now, different states can be different, but a lot of the states have kind of moved to also being due May 17th, but that's not the whole story.
Oh, gotcha. Now, Glenn, you mentioned, of course, that we have seen big changes this past year. We've seen the government really rushing to figure out ways in which Americans could be compensated throughout this pandemic. Other than the CFP, MFP, PPP things, are there any other big tax changes that took place in 2020 that growers need to be aware of as they're going in to meet with their accountants in 2021?
Well, one of the other ones that's kind of come up here recently is this what's called the employee retention credit, and without getting into a lot of details, that has a possible way to impact a farmer if your revenues were sufficiently reduced when you're comparing like your quarter over quarter revenues, and there's a chance that you can get up to a $7,000 credit per employee per quarter. But it does interact with the PPP. We're still waiting on guidance, as you mentioned, Mike. So it's really hard to know exactly what these rules are. But this employee retention credit is something to definitely keep in mind going Glenn, forward. Once hopefully we'll get guidance here this month in April. At least that's the hope.
Well, and I think that's the key. You mentioned we still don't really have this guidance out there for growers who are trying to prepare for their tax season, and they're ready to write Uncle Sam the check. How should they be approaching it this year? Is this a year maybe to hang back a little bit and wait until these rules are promulgated before you get in there and sit with your accountant?
Yeah, and that's what we're talking to a lot of our clients about. And so one thing, if you are making quarterly estimates, and a lot of farmers don't have to make a quarterly estimate because they either make one payment on January 15th or they file by March 1st. But, for those taxpayers that do have to make quarterly estimates, the first quarter 2021 tax estimate is still due April 15th. So that's kind of the more to the story thing I was referring to earlier. That's still due April 15th. And we were hoping that the IRS was maybe going to change their mind, but as of right now, we're going to have to make this kind of judgment call on how much of a payment to make if you have it, if you believe you need to pay something for 2021 tax year. But to get back to your question, this probably is a year that we're talking to more and more clients about, hey, maybe we just extend this return, on May 17th. We'd still have to pay our tax, our estimated tax that we think we might owe, but it allows us more time. We'd have until October 15th to file and finalize the numbers. And so, maybe there's going to be tax laws passed. There's almost certainly going to be something passed between now, in September, October, we're thinking. And I think of all years, with all the other things that are going on, have a little bit of benefit of hindsight to see if we want to change our mind on, as an example, how much depreciation do we want to take? Maybe we want to save some of that depreciation for the following years if we think tax rates are going up. So just we don't like to make rash decisions, and so in a lot of cases, it may make sense to extend your return.
All right, check into that. Talk with your accountant, Glenn Birnbaum, Sikich, LLP. Well, it's time to talk markets, and to help us understand what's going on in the futures and the cash markets this week, we're joined by Brian Hoops from Midwest Market Solutions. Brian, for the first time in a while, it seems like wheat is really grabbing the headlines this week. What's going on?
Yeah, it really has. All winter long, wheat was the follower to corn and soybeans as those markets drove higher on their own fundamentals. But now wheat is taking the leadership role. For one thing, we've had, I think, a top in the U.S. dollar, and that dollar is starting to weaken. Of course, when the dollar weakens, that is usually friendly for wheat. Wheat seems to be the most affected by a U.S. dollar, either negatively or positively. But one of the real fundamentals that is standing out for wheat producers is these drought conditions that are occurring across Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, northern Minnesota. All these areas are in just an extreme drought type conditions. We have offices in each of those states, and they have reported their clients are just hoping and praying. They're planning in drought and dust right now, and just hoping and praying there's a rain that will come to help this crop germinate. The spring wheat belt is in badly need of some rain. Even snow would be taken at this point in time, just some moisture to kind of get the crop up and running. We're expected to see wheat acres down this year. USDA confirmed that on the March 31 plan intention. Spring wheat acres are going to be down compared to a year ago levels, and right now this crop may not be able to germinate and grow substantially during the early period here because of some drought conditions and lack of rain in the forecast.
Well, with all that being said, and you mentioned USDA is projecting the fourth lowest wheat acres on record, and especially in that area of the northern plains, Brian, we continue to see wheat acres lost to corn and soybeans as those genetics improve. With all of that in mind, as you're looking ahead for this Minneapolis wheat price, where are you setting some targets this time of year?
Yeah, I was visiting with some clients about that earlier. If you're holding on to some old crop, we get back up near the highs. That's a place where I think a lot of people are interested to start selling again. Basis levels are very strong across most of that northern plains areas. So there's, I think, an incentive if we get back near the highs, which, it seems like we're going to if it doesn't rain very soon. That's a place where I think you start merchandising some old crop sales, maybe convert that to reownership. It's time to sweep the bins of some of this older crop inventory, even starting to look at making some new crop sales. It looks like $7 is a likely target, but that may seem cheap if in fact we don't get much rain to alleviate these drought conditions.
Well, and those drought conditions aren't just going to impact wheat. Of course, North Dakota is a tremendous soybean producer as well. Brian, as you look out here in soybean prices, particularly new crop, what are you looking at for price targets?
Yeah, it's an interesting point you bring up. You can't really switch spring wheat acres over to corn because you need that moisture to get the corn out of the ground at the same time. But you could delay seeding spring wheat a little bit and plant soybeans a little bit later. And some producers may, in fact, start to do that. They may want to look at going to soybeans and hoping that it starts to rain in May and June after they've got that crop seeded. And that could, work in the favor of spring wheat acres being down even further than what was expected, but adding to the acres of soybeans because there is a good price incentive for soybeans. We've seen the market, I think, kind of find an equilibrium here, but at this 12.50, 60, 70 area, I think a good run to $13 will attract some acres and attract some hedging and selling pressure as well.
Absolutely. Brian, $13. I mean, that is something that a lot of growers would love to see. Folks, we'll be back for more with Brian Hoops from Midwest Market Solutions when we return from break. This portion of This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by the Soybean Checkoff. Tips, videos, how-tos, and more. If it has to do with ag tech, you'll find it in the Tech Tool Shed, your unbiased one-stop resource. We're talking markets with Brian Hoops from Midwest Market Solutions. And Brian, this corn market continues to find bidders. What are you watching here for new corn price targets as you look out into this first half of the growing season?
Well, you know, Mike, one of the oldest marketing programs and the easiest ones that clients can implement is when you get those planters out of the shed and get them rolling. That's a time to start making sales and buy some put options, get yourself a price floor. I think if we could get December corn to the $5 mark, that's going to attract quite a bit of hedging. Just like soybeans at the $13 level, you should be looking at doing some minimum price options there as well. You know, we've had a tremendous rally compared to a year ago where we were at in prices. And so you really want to start being defensive as we get to the $5 mark, and you know, maybe buy some put options there, make sales and buy some calls in case we do have a drought-like conditions going into the summer. But you know, this corn market does need to secure some acres. The USDA is likely understating our exports for this old crop marketing year, and you know, we're seeing, I think, this market, you know, wanting to buy some acres, and I think it will. If we get to the $5 mark, clients across Iowa have been telling me that a lot of people have left corn stocks undone last fall anticipating to go to soybeans, but now with the corn market hovering near $5, they are putting some fertilizer down and disking those stocks up. And you put that fertilizer down, it's an indication they're going to go corn on corn instead of planting soybeans in a traditional rotation.
Absolutely. I mean, the market price is working. It's telling growers we need corn acres, and they are responding. Brian, we're seeing some very similar market dynamics in the pork market. That thing has been on fire for quite a while. We've seen tremendous exports going into China. Do you anticipate that to continue as we roll through the summer?
I do. And we're also getting into a situation where we're starting to see a little bit less inventory around us. You know, a year or more ago, we kind of had a little bit of a contraction in some of the breeding herd and data. When the prices got just too cheap, producers cut back. And now we're starting to see the effects of that in smaller herd inventories. So the tighter numbers coming into the summer months at a time when our export business has been red hot. Last week's sales were a marketing year high. And I think we'll continue to keep pushing pork over to China. They have a lot of problems with their breeding herd, and that sets us up for strong prices. You know, markets are anticipating that already, well over $100 in those summer month contracts. But you know, we could add another $5 to $10 on that as the grills come out of kind of hibernation through the winter months, and we start to get into the summer season where, you know, people are more apt to grill and be outside and eat beef and pork.
Absolutely, and it certainly seems as though they're starting to eat more beef. We had the cash cattle market flat for weeks and weeks and weeks, even as futures continue to move higher. But Brian, I know you work with a lot of cattle producers. That cash bid is starting to move up. Are we seeing packers finally lose a little bit of leverage and have to pay into the market?
Yeah, you know, the box beef has really gone up as well, so it's given packers plenty of margins. They're well over $500 a head on margins, so they've got a lot to work with in here, and they can afford to pay up for the cash markets, and they have been doing that this last week. Cash is moving sharply higher. It's encouraged all the futures contracts to move higher. We've seen contract highs, you know, June through the back months of live cattle. Many of the feeder cattle contracts have also seen renewed demand and push to contract highs. This is another market that tighter supplies are coming in this second, third into the fourth quarter, and this is why the futures market's anticipating it. It's trying to build a premium in there, and you know, we certainly look like we're going to be very strong from an export standpoint. Domestic usage is improving, and we have tighter supplies, so it sets us up for a strong summer and fall months.
Stronger summer in the cattle market, music to a lot of producers' ears. That's Brian Hoops from Midwest Market Solutions.
Chad Colby's look at agriculture technology comes your way next, brought to you by the IBM Watson Decision Platform, combining AI with Internet of Things data to help agribusiness increase yields, improve quality, and drive sustainability.
Over the past 10 years, drones have gone from being something a hobbyist might have to one thing you find on a lot of farms, and that technology continues to improve. Chad Colby has an update.
Who remembers the Phantom drones? And how about this old relic? An original Phantom with a GoPro Hero 3 Plus and a gimbal? Hi everyone, I'm Chad Colby, and on This Week and Next Week, here in the tech segment, we're going to talk about the go-to drones for 2021. The first one is the DJI Mini 2. And if you recall, we actually had it in the Christmas segment this year. I love this little drone. This little drone weighs basically less than a can of Diet Coke, about the same size when you fold it up. But some of the imagery we've got from this drone are amazing. I recently had it on a construction site, and this thing was phenomenal. Look at how small the case is for this drone. It's wonderful. And this case is packed full of things like the controller, the battery, all the cables you need. It's a great little drone at a price point that's even better. Remember that old Phantom I showed you? It cost nearly $4,000 to fly for 8, maybe 10 minutes. This thing will fly nearly 20 minutes for $750 with way better quality. Moving on from that, the second drone I want to talk about is a new drone. It's also from DJI. It's the FPV drone, and what that means, it has first-person view. You wear goggles like this, they're really attractive, but you're looking at the same view that this drone has. Now, as far as the application goes, I think that's still a little unclear. You can see on some of this footage we took here in the last week, it gives us a completely different sense of the footage. And I really like that. Price point with the case, it's under $2,000, but this one's pretty special and very high speed, lots of performance. But here in the back of my truck, I've got two other workhorse drones, and we're gonna talk about those in great detail next week. The main things about them is it's carrying a different payload, a better camera, better sensor, bigger batteries for longer flight time, including that Quanix. Get this, you can fly 400 acres on one battery with that. But the image quality is amazing on those two drones. Be sure to join us next week as we learn more about those as well as we prepare for 2021.
Thanks, Chad. It's amazing how that video footage continues to improve. And stay with us, we'll have more on This Week in Agribusiness. Welcome back to This Week in Agribusiness. This time of year, it's pretty common for farmers to be taking a peek over the fence row to see what their neighbors are up to, and we wanted to do the same thing. For us to do that, we figured we'd better check in with our farm broadcaster friends across the country. And to start with, we're talking with Kara Hart. Kara's with the Red River Farm Network, and Kara, it has been dry up in North Dakota. Tell us, how are farmers adapting to that dryness as we start out the spring?
Well, hi, Mike. Thanks for having us today. It is dry up here in the Northern Plains. And on Thursday, we got the latest U.S. drought monitor. I believe up to 70% of North Dakota is in extreme drought. That's certainly an increase from the previous week. South Dakota is seeing some drought conditions too. Not as severe, though. There are some areas of extreme drought in the northern tier. Minnesota is doing a little bit better. And we are getting some much needed rains this week. So farmers trying to adapt to their planting, some field work based off of those conditions.
Well, speaking of that, Kara, I know we're getting into crop insurance plant dates up there in North Dakota. Are growers getting pretty well prepared with the dryness and the soil conditions?
That's a good question. So I think with the warmer than average temperatures we've been seeing across much of the region this spring has a lot of people with spring fever, but most of them are being extremely patient. So trying not to jump ahead of those crop insurance dates to get some things seeded. Now, there are farmers, depending on where you're at in the state and despite the dry conditions, that have decided they are going to go ahead and move forward. So it's certainly, it varies across the region at this time.
Now up there in North Dakota, of course, this dryness was probably beneficial to a lot of folks as they're wrapping up calving season. What's the general sentiment you're hearing from livestock producers in the state of North Dakota?
Mike, that's a great question. And I don't do as much coverage on the livestock side of things, but we do have a coworker that is very actively involved in calving. She and her husband have a farm, and she mentions the dry conditions. That's certainly something that livestock producers are aware of, trying to prepare as best as they can ahead of grazing. Some trying to figure out how to supplement the needs, because maybe they won't be able to take their cattle out to graze as early. But, you talk to some folks in South Dakota. I visited with some farmers this week that seem to think that calving went pretty well for them, considering what calving has been the previous years, dry instead of muddy. On the flip side of that, in areas where it's really dry, it's almost too dry. So, yeah.
We'll have to keep an eye on pasture conditions as the rest of the summer wears on, and that's certainly true for crop growers as well. A big thanks to Kara Hart from the Red River Farm Network. Thanks for bringing us up to speed on what's going on in North Dakota. Let's work our way south into the heart of corn country. We are talking now to Dwayne Murley from KWMT Radio in Fort Dodge, Iowa. And Dwayne, how are ground conditions looking over in your part of the state?
Mike, thank you for having me on this weekend. They are looking great. I spent Monday and Tuesday night out in the field, and boy, I tell you, the ground was really working up nice. I was actually out field cultivating some ground that had been ripped last fall, and boy, I tell you what I saw out there, it just really looks good right now.
So, Dwayne, last summer, western Iowa got dry, and it has stayed dry. What's the sentiment of the growers in your region? Are they excited to get this crop in the ground?
I think so, Mike. Last year was such a tough year, and like I said, the dryness has kind of worked its way into the western part of Iowa. And yeah, I think they're just ready to, get the planting season underway for 2021 and really get out there and just get that crop in the ground right now.
Well, speaking of getting the crop in the ground, Dwayne, more and more farmers on social media are talking about getting their beans in earlier and earlier. In your part of the state, are you seeing a lot of guys running early with soybeans?
Not quite yet, but a year ago we sure did, Mike, and I think a lot of guys were just kind of testing the water on that, and from what I understand, there was great success in doing that, getting those beans out there, get them in the ground, get the growing degrees going and everything. So it would not surprise me, and especially, Mike, we've had some pretty ideal weather so far early in this season. So yeah, it really honestly would not surprise me to see some soybeans go on the ground before some corn in this area.
Well, now let's talk about the corn in your area, Dwayne. That is some great corn country that you are in. There's a lot of livestock on feed over there. Corn is vital to the economy of western Iowa. Are you hearing a lot of guys thinking about putting more ground into corn this year, looking at the markets?
The way it looks right now, probably, and of course with the ethanol plants in this area, Mike, as you know, we see a lot of corn on corn each and every year. So some of those guys are probably not going to switch that up, but the guys that have been probably more dominant soybeans in the past, they could put more acres to corn this year. And we're actually, over the last couple of days, I've seen some corn planters out rolling already. So, we could see a switch in that this year.
Well, as we think about switching those acres, of course, fertilizer prices have skyrocketed. I think back to a year ago, there were some challenges across Iowa and the northern Corn Belt in ammonia availability, anhydrous ammonia. Have you heard any challenges for crop inputs so far this year?
Mike, I have not. I've seen the tanks rolling back and forth from the co-ops to the fields and so forth, and I've got friends that truck anhydrous, and they've been busy for the last 3 weeks. But personally, no, I have not heard anything as far as any delays on getting the anhydrous out into the field. But last year with the fall harvest, there were a lot of guys that applied the anhydrous last fall. So, how that's going to play into the spring, I'm not quite sure at this point.
So, Dwayne, we've got climbing markets, we've got dry soils, the ground is fit to run. Farmers in your area feeling pretty confident about the 2021 growing season?
Yeah, I think so, Mike. The cover crops are greening up right now. The calves are out in the pastures and so forth. The pastures are greening up too, cow-calf combinations and so forth. So, yeah, I think it's going to be a fun year in this area.
Well, thanks, Dwayne. That's Dwayne Murley from KWMT Radio. And folks, don't go away. We'll be back looking at planting progress in Kansas and Missouri when we return.
This Week in Agribusiness, serving America's most essential industry, is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone.
Thanks for joining us on This Week in Agribusiness. As spring rolls forward across the country, farmers are working hard to meet this growing season head on. We had a chance to talk with Mark Allison, a Missouri farmer, about what's happening on his operation.
I think the better question is what's not taking place on the farm right now. We're in pretty good shape schedule-wise, about normal schedule as far as, or on time planting corn. We're planting corn right now. Also been fertilizing some pastures. We've top dressed wheat for the second time around. So, and I'd say that's pretty common for the farmers in our area. A lot of corn's gone in the past week to 10 days in this area, and will continue going as long as weather permits. We've had seasonable weather for the last couple of weeks for things to dry out. We had about 6 inches of rain about a month ago, and at that time we were wondering if we were ever going to get in the field, and now we've been in the field nonstop for the last couple of weeks anyway. So I think everything's rolling pretty well. Calving season's pretty well over now. On the cow-calf side of things, pastures have been fertilized, or some pastures have been fertilized, and then some more will get fertilized once we're done fertilizing corn ground. And then beans, we typically don't start beans until around Memorial Day weekend, but I know some guys in the area will start planting beans here in the next couple weeks as well.
We also asked Mark about the economic outlook for his farm.
Well, right now, we have the best corn and soybean prices and wheat prices we've had in several years. Hopefully we can sustain that through harvest, but I know the carryouts for corn and soybeans are pretty short anyway, and so that's kept the markets the highest they've been, at least in the last several years. So it'll all depend, at least in this area, it always depends on weather and what kind of yields we can come up with, but I know there's certainly been some opportunities for forward pricing some corn and soybeans and wheat for next year's crops anyway. So at least an opportunity to lock in some profit on some acres anyway.
In the heart of the country, it was those windy conditions that had folks talking again. Max was in central Kansas talking with Randy Rolifson, the president of Abilene Machine, about how the wind just hasn't let up.
This week has been really, really windy. I see the guys that get in the field. I see some cultivators running and some guys running some discs around the country. So they're starting to get their nose in there and they're getting them tractors rolling.
Have you seen any planters out around you?
I have not seen any planters yet, but you can tell they're getting the ground ready and they'll be planting here soon.
I was out wandering the countryside looking at some of the wheat fields. How would you describe overall the wheat condition around here?
I think the wheat looks fairly good. It's a little too early to tell. I see little patchy spots in it, and I don't really understand why. It's we got some 2-inch wheat and we got some 6-inch wheat. I don't know what that means for sure. I'm not a wheat expert, but
this time of the year,
I'm going to ask some of these guys what's going on with that.
This is kind of a critical stage for wheat, isn't it?
As long as we don't get a frost here.
We've seen it.
We have seen that over the years, and that can sure knock that wheat down.
Earlier this week, the USDA said that the Kansas winter wheat crop was at about 54%, good to excellent. That puts it on par with the wheat crop in the rest of the United States.
Now, agriculture meteorologist Greg Solier brings us his farm weather forecast for the nation for the week ahead. It's presented by Pivot BioProven, the nitrogen-producing microbes that stay put, whether or not.
Well, as we heard from Mark and Randy, everybody is looking at the weather, and it's time to get a weather update. Greg's with us. Greg, what are you looking out in the Pacific Northwest?
Well, a very quiet weather picture out there, and actually across much of the country this week. The spring storminess kind of easing on down. Moisture has come on down of late, and we've seen some modest drought improvement, but overall, east of the Cascades, a different story. Out across the Dakotas, a different story, and points on southward with drought in mind. But look at this very quiet, benign weather map and chart set here. A little troughiness into the Pacific Northwest. That's it. High pressure, seasonal temperatures, plenty of opportunity for whatever you got up your sleeve with outdoor work in mind. We do see a front encroaching late in the week. Following weekend, there may be a couple of showers beginning to break out. Rogue River Basin, Willamette Valley, milder air across the northern and central Rockies. A bit of a cool-off slated, though. Maybe some late-season frost and freeze potential across the Dakotas. And yes, we know here is the epicenter, at least as it applies to the northern plains of the ongoing extreme drought weather pattern. Don't see much improvement there in the short term, longer range perhaps. Meanwhile, a bit of a front coming through the southwestern sections of the country, already tapping into moisture supply and snow melt and the warmth. So this is going to be another dire season with regard to that stuff. Of course, the ongoing dryness and drought extending into the central and southern high plains, and wind too, by the way, in through areas of Oklahoma and Kansas, coming off last week's rain and snow system. Very quiet weather picture again across across much of the Four Corners, valleys of California, coolness from the Black Hills on southward, seasonal temperatures, and little if any organized precip southward into the Red River Valley of the south.
Now, Greg, last week we saw some scattered thunderstorms across parts of the northern Corn Belt. Are they going to see more of them this next week?
No, I don't think so. Yeah, there were some drenching rains, severe weather reports kind of dotted across parts of the Great Plains. That line that came through late last week into parts of Illinois and Missouri. So they got some good soaking rains there into parts of the upper Midwest as well. We're kind of keeping an eye on this dry area here, probably expanding down through the southern Corn Belt, and we know what's going on across the plains. A weak and fast-moving disturbance is moving on through. Little if any organized precip. The back end stalls on out, sets up a bit of a boundary here, but no moisture to work with. Fast west to east upper level wind flow, bits of frost and freeze potential, and that is it. Nothing going on in the moisture department across the northern and central sections of the plains and Corn Belt. A couple of showers and thunderstorms scattered across the deep south and southeastern part of the country. More wind in the desert southwest back into the southern plains. Again, we've seen drought improvement here, ongoing here, probably redeveloping across the entire area with time with a quiet late week weather pattern on the southern plains.
Looking across the eastern Corn Belt all the way to the east coast, Greg, planters are rolling. What's the forecast look like out there?
A little more rain would be appreciated, but kind of a downward trend on temperature. A few sprinkles and snowflakes around this weather system that's making its move through the Great Lakes region. And we move back into high pressure over the northern and central parts of the plains, Corn Belt areas too. A couple of scattered showers into the eastern states and more wind, as has been the case with these weather systems into the lower Great Lakes region. Plenty of rainfall of late and severe fast-moving frontal system on the move from the southern plains into the deep south and southeastern part of the country. A couple of showers and thunderstorms. Cooler, drier air follows in across the delta and points on westward the end portion of the week.
Now, Greg Solier is back with his extended farm weather forecast for the country. Presented by Pivot Bio Proven. Visit pivotbio.com to find a representative near you.
We're talking weather. And Greg, during your first segment, you mentioned dryness and drought quite a few times. Looking at the precipitation this next week, what are you expecting?
Not much going on. Very quiet weather picture. So again, coming off that weather system that came on by here of late, there will be opportunity for some outdoor work, additional field work where you were removed from any drenching rains. And we had some of it last week into parts of the plains, upper Midwest, western Corn Belt. This week, while it looks impressive, it's only spotty to scattered quarter, maybe half-inch Missouri Valley into the Great Lakes region, Corn Belt. There will be maybe a couple of downpours here, but overall still some opportunity for outdoor work and little, if any, going on from the divide on westward. Already tapping in, Mike, to runoff and snow melt issues into the southwestern part of the country with early season warmth. That'll be a developing story in the weeks to come, too.
Well, it's developing, and how do things look in that next week of April 19th?
From a temperature standpoint, we'll begin to see temperatures moderate some coming off this probably week to 10-day spell of cool weather that will have extended all the way down across the deep south. More of a west to east upper level wind flow. So temperatures a few degrees below average. Not much to significant warmth in the soils as it ought to be here for mid to late April across the central plains and Corn Belt. And here is the warmth, but nothing out of control. Southwestern part of the country into the southeastern states too. And you get this boundary, but there's no big trough. So it looks like precip fast moving a little above average Pacific Northwest. This would be good news across the Dakotas and upper Great Lakes region. Probably north of the Sioux, some late season snow, normal precip central and southern Corn Belt, and the expanding dryness and drought issues across the southern plains, southwestern part of the country drying out. That would be okay in the southeastern sections of the nation.
Greg, what are you seeing as the calendar flips to May?
As we get in through temperatures, some of that cold air holding on through the Canadian prairie. I think this is about as far south as it goes. Nice turnaround in temperatures across the west, with the exception of snow melt. That will be fast and quick. Southern plains, good crop growth and development there. Southeastern part of the country, and again, about normal to a bit below on temperatures across the Corn Belt, northern and central plains. So we do foresee some additional short-term drought improvement across the Dakotas, upper Midwest. We'll keep an eye on this corridor here. Normal precip expected, and again, a corridor of below average southwestern parts of the country in through Florida and the Carolinas too.
How about that first full week of May, Greg? What does the forecast hold?
From a temperature standpoint here, we get a bit of a northward movement on the jet stream, and where soil moisture is okay, things are in the ground. There'll be a hopping here, trough across the western part of the country, but from a precip standpoint, this is still fairly good news. Northern parts of the plains, northern Corn Belt locales, probably some field work delays with showers and thunderstorms. Everyone else about normal across the heartland, but that will change in the weeks to come.
Next on This Week in Agribusiness, it's Max's Tractor Shed, spotlighting another great American tractor.
Well, many of us have photographs that were taken on Dad or Granddad's tractor, pictures where we're sitting up on that seat. But not many of us have a picture from more than 6 decades ago. I'll give you an example, though, from Max's Tractor Shed, brought to you by Store Lock Tool Cabinets. They claim it's the best quality tool cabinet you'll ever buy. Well, when you do a comparison with that other stuff that's out there, you'll see that Store Lock is in a league of its own. Go to their website to see the configurations available and the colors at storlock.com, STORLOC.com. Chuck Moffler in Indiana has his grandfather's Case VAC that was made in 1952, and he's restored it recently. It looks very good. He told me he stripped it down, he painted it, he converted the electrical over to the 12-volt system. Oh, he has an umbrella up there, too, for the tractor rides and tractor shows in the heat of summer. But this is a little bit unusual. Not many of us have a photograph of us from back in the day when we were very young on Dad or Granddad's tractor. Chuck has that. He's sitting up there on his grandfather's Case VAC. It was made in 1952, and the photograph was taken of Chuck when he was about 4 years old. Well, let's find out what late model farm equipment is crossing the block in the week ahead. Big Iron Auctions report is next. Here's Mark Stock.
Well, Max, we've had some record-breaking prices established on our recent auctions on BigIron.com. We've got quality equipment on these retirement sales. A lot of the equipment sold is one owner. So check out our next auction, April 14th. We'll be selling 2,592 items from 20 different states, 368 different sellers. Doug Ronk is one of our retirement sales from Oakwood, Illinois. Their public inspection of their quality equipment is Friday, April the 16th, but they've got a New Holland T6050 mechanical front tractor. They'll be selling their New Holland 313 RDB disc bind. They've also got a New Holland BR 7090 round baler and a J&M 875-16 grain cart. Doug Yeagerlaner is retiring from Clay City, Indiana. They'll be selling their Case IH Magnum 235 mechanical front tractor with only 802 hours. They've also got a Case IH 2388 combine that will sell. F&M Leopard Inc. is retiring from Plattsmouth, Nebraska. They've got a John Deere 7730 tractor selling with only 2,907 hours. They've also got a John Deere 9550 side hill combine. Mark Bennett is from Bethany, Illinois. They've got a Bueller Versatile 2210 mechanical front tractor. They've got a Rogator 854 self-propelled sprayer and a John Deere 955 compact utility tractor. Kylie Witt is from Edmond, Oklahoma. They've got a John Deere 7800 mechanical front tractor. Another great lineup of quality equipment will sell on April 14th on BigIron.com.
The FFA Chapter Tribute is sponsored by Nationwide, the #1 farm insurer in the country. To register your FFA chapter, go to nationwidesupportsffa.com. That's nationwidesupportsffa.com. Nationwide, we stand for you.
This Week in Agribusiness is proud to continue our salute to FFA, and this week we're talking with Alex Scoville. Alex is the president of the State of Michigan FFA, and Alex, you assumed your role just as coronavirus was taking hold. How weird has this last year been?
It's definitely been a roller coaster, that's for sure. So yeah, we got elected right before everything shut down. It was actually the week before, like all the schools closed in Michigan and everything shut down. And so we, at first, were really expecting quite a normal year. But as we got into it, at first it was kind of a challenge, like get to know each other. We have a 12-person team here in Michigan. And I know compared to a lot of other states, that's a fairly large state officer team. So getting to know each other through a group chat was a little interesting, but we got through it. We were fortunate enough to have a couple of in-person events, a lot of virtual events that we thought were done quite well. And we're excited for our convention coming up. It's going to air here in a few weeks.
That's fantastic. And Alex, what got you into FFA?
So I guess you could say I was almost kind of born into it a little bit. So my dad was a high school ag teacher and FFA advisor. Right out of college, he worked as that for 7 years before going and working in the industry. And then I was born a few years later. And so growing up, I was just always, going to our local chapter banquets or going with my mom to dairy foods contest practice or anything involved with the chapter. I had an uncle who was also an advisor. And so I really just grew up around the organization. So when it came time in 7th grade to do junior high conduct meetings, it was just natural.
It was just a natural fit. And Alex, you're excited to stay in agriculture as you move on from FFA?
Yeah, definitely. So currently I am a freshman at Michigan State University studying agriculture education. And right now I have plans to transfer out to Kansas State University this fall. And when I do that, I don't know if I'll stay in ag ed, but for now that's where I'm at.
Fantastic. Alex Govel, president of Michigan FFA.
Now, Samuelson Says. Insight and commentary from Orion Samuelson.
As we come to the end of spring and the beginning of summer, we also come to the beginning of activities for agricultural events, county and state fairs, state FFA conventions, and agricultural festivals at various communities across the country. But this year, I hope we won't have to use the words virtual or postpone or cancel, because frankly, I'm concerned about the future of many of these events from a financial standpoint. County and state fairs had little or no income last year, and they need that annual income to keep the grounds in shape and to schedule the events and the entertainment and the 4-H and the FFA livestock judging. So will you help me eliminate virtual, cancel, and postpone from this year's vocabulary? Because we need those events to salute agriculture, to salute 4-H and FFA members and their projects, and everything else that goes along with getting together to visit with neighbors maybe we see once a year at county and state fairs. I am hoping that we will survive the financial problems faced by these many great events, and I hope they will be held this year. And if they are, please attend and support them, because I want to see the county and state fairs and 4-H and FFA and everything else that goes along with agriculture able to be staged again this year. So eliminate the words virtual, cancel, and postpone, please. My thoughts on Samuelson Says.
Don't go away. When we return, we'll take a look at the Great Plains Max Chisel. With planting underway, folks across the country are getting a chance to evaluate their tillage this past year, and maybe you're looking for some new tillage tools. If that's the case, check out the Farm Progress virtual experience where Great Plains featured their new Max Chisel.
The Great Plains Max Chisel. The Max Chisel from Great Plains is an aggressive primary tillage tool designed to bury residue, remove compaction layers, and achieve complete fracture at shallower tillage depths, all while leaving the field smoother and more uniform than traditional disc rippers. Two opposing rows of exclusive concave turbo blades have patented samurai edges to aggressively remove root balls and incorporate residue. Segmented chopper reels pull the dirt back into the shank voids, leaving a level, vertically tilled profile ready for a single pass tool to finish the field before planting. Max Chisel offers a choice between heavy-duty toggle trip shanks or standard chisel shanks. Max Chisel is available in 2 rigid and 4 folding models. in widths from 11 feet 6 inches to 24 feet. All models feature maintenance-free tapered bearings that keep the grease in and the debris out, hydraulically adjustable disc gang depth control, and walking tandem axles for consistent mainframe height and uniform tillage depth. Add the optional rear Max Lift roller to further customize the Max chisel to suit the needs of your operation. Find your local Great Plains dealer and ask about the rugged Max Chisel, or visit GreatPlainsAg.com for more information.
You can see that video and 99 others at FarmProgressShow.com. That's our show for this week, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're out there working in the field, be safe. We look forward to seeing you next weekend on This Week in Agribusiness.
Closed captioning for This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Kubota. Shape your world. This Week in Agribusiness is brought to you by Firestone. You never farm alone. This Week in Agribusiness is produced by OMAX Communications in association with 22 Creative Group. We invite you to visit us online at agbizweek.com.